go.
You just knocked over your water.
That's all right, thank you. All right, we're going to be starting, everybody. Testing, okay. A little spotlight here. Okay. If everyone could please take their seats. A little bit of a glare.
It is, it's tough, yeah. I forgot to bring my sunglasses.
Okay, everybody, we're going to start. I want to welcome Steve Hoffman, the Commissioner of the Cannabis Control Commission. If everyone could sit down and be quiet. Thank you. It's a privilege and pleasure to have you with us again this year. And I just wanted to catch up with you and see how things are going.
Going great. Living the dream.
You're not that busy, are you, these days?
You know, as a matter of fact, my biggest challenge is figuring out how to fill the time.
Right. Nothing to do.
Anyway, it's nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, pleasure. You know, I have to start off by just asking you, every day when you wake up and look in the mirror, do you say, what the hell was I thinking?
You know, actually not. I think I probably gave you the same answer last year. Actually, when I look in the mirror in the morning, aside from saying, how did you get to be 66 years old? Where did all the time go? But the other thing is I say, you know, I'm really fortunate. I'm fortunate. I didn't know this job existed. I wasn't looking for a job. I was trying to be retired. This job came out of left field. And I feel really fortunate that I had the opportunity. I feel really fortunate that I was at the time of my life where it made sense to do this. So I really think I'm lucky.
Well, you have to admit, I don't think you expected these kind of challenges. I
didn't know, quite honestly, what to expect. I was a private citizen. I voted no, as everybody, I think, in the state knows, on question 4. And I will say, honestly, it just wasn't that big of a deal to me. So when I started this job, I'd never been in public service before. I'd never dealt with the media before. I certainly didn't know what to expect. And I still am a little bit surprised by the intensity that exists on all sides of this issue. So it is an adventure in every sense of the word, but not one that I had any explicit expectations about.
Well, it seems that no matter what happens in the press, they're pointing the finger at the CCC, whether you're a mayor in Fall River or...
Yeah, you know, it still stuns me to this day that you know, allegedly corrupt mayor of Fall River takes bribes, and that's my fault.
And of course, the vaping situation, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But Steve, why don't we just talk about some of the numbers of what's going on with the applications, where the system is. I think there's about 28 dispensaries open now. 30 now. Maybe you can shed some light on that.
I'll give you some high-level numbers. These are all, by the way, available on our website. We are totally committed to transparency. We have an open data architecture so that pretty much everything except for the personal information about applicants is available to anybody that wants to go in and take a look. And I'm going to give you approximate numbers. As of our last public meeting, which was 2 weeks ago, we have approved, this is on the adult use side, I'll talk about medical in a second. We've approved just slightly over 200 applications. Those applications, the approved applications are in 3 different stages of the process. There's provisional applications, provisional licenses, there's final licenses, and then there's commence operations. So of that 200 plus, we have 66 that have commenced operations, and they include, as you just mentioned, 30 retailers, but also cultivation and manufacturing as well. We have, I think of the remaining numbers, we have 50 final licenses. So the final license is people have the ability, that when you have a final license, people have the ability to possess marijuana. They have to enter their inventory into our seed-to-sale tracking system. They have to alert us when they've done that. We come out and do a physical inventory to make sure that what they have in the system matches the physical inventory, and then we'll give them a commence operation. So there's about 50 in that status, and the remainder are provisional licenses, which just says your business plan is acceptable. Now go out and build your facility, and when it's done, call us and we'll come out and do a final inspection. So that's kind of the current status. There are 343, if I remember correctly, completed applications that are in review. And the review has 3 parts to it. It has background checks that are conducted by a third-party agency. It has our own review of the business plan, make sure that we're comfortable that the business plan meets our regulations. And then finally, when we get a completed application, we go back to the city or town and say, you have 60 days to get back to us and tell us that your bylaws and zoning have been met. So there are 300 plus in that. And so that's kind of a sense of what's coming next. But just to give you a sense of what the entire universe looks like, we have, on top of all the applications I just articulated, we have something like 3,000 incomplete applications where people have started the licensing process in our system, have completed part of it, but not the entirety. So that just gives you a sense of what the future demand looks like for licenses.
No, I'm glad you clarified that, because if you read some of the articles, it's always good to hear the numbers from the source. One article said there were 6,000 incomplete applications.
No, that's not true.
Yeah. So
I think 3,000 is still a pretty big number.
It is. And how many people are on your staff to be able to do this?
So we right now have about 65 people on our staff. That includes obviously licensing analysts, but also our enforcement personnel. We, run an agency, so we have to have human resources and finance and legal and so forth. But the biggest part of our staff are licensing and enforcement. And we have continued to add to our licensing staff. We currently have 2 open positions that we're trying to fill. We know that we have a lot of work and a lot of demand, and we're totally committed to keep up with that demand, although it's a challenge.
No, it is challenging, and it's not an easy process, especially in a highly regulated industry. But one of the issues that applicants are having, that operators who are in various stages of that application process, and we've talked about this, is the frustration of how backlogged it is and how clogged that pipe is. You're supposed to issue license or have hearings within, I believe, 90 days from when completion.
From when it's complete, that's correct.
Right, and that's taking longer.
No, so let me just clarify, because I'm not denying that we have to get better and we have to continue to add staff and get more efficient in terms of processing licenses. But the 90 days, let me be explicit, the 90 days is in the law. It says once an application has been deemed complete, we have 90 days to take action on that application. We have never missed that window. Now, we are not completely accountable or able to control that in that 90 days we have to do the background checks. We have to hear from the city and towns, as I just said, that everything from a bylaw and zoning perspective has been met, and we do our own analysis. We have never not taken action within 90 days. The challenge that we have and the backlog that exists is when all 4 required packets have been submitted until we actually do the intake review to determine that the application is complete. That's what's taking us too long. But once we have deemed an application complete, we've never missed the 90-day window. And by the way, I thought you and I agreed you were going to just toss me softballs today.
That is you answered it eloquently. But there are other parts of the process that are of concern to operators that require consent and approval from the CCC. For example, the change of control.
Yes.
And that applies to whether you're adding a new director or a person of direct or indirect control under the new regs. If you stay below that 10%, you're okay. But what's happening in this industry, and we're going to talk about this later on the M&A side and just capital, is there's a tremendous capital crunch going on, and people need, and there's limited banking, as you've heard. So when somebody comes along, and we structure a lot of these deals, and we absolutely try to be totally compliant with the regs. You can't take in that money necessarily. You can't have a new director or an investor go over that 10% without going through that
That's
process.
correct.
And that can take a long time.
Yep.
And have you thought about ways that maybe can shorten that process, but still give you the back-end approval?
Yeah, so I think that's an important point. So we are absolutely committed to enforce all of our regulations, including the limitations in terms of ownership, the caps that you can only own 3 retail facilities, 3 cultivation facilities, 3 manufacturing facilities. We're totally committed to enforce that. I think the biggest thing that's happened is when Canada legalized, at the federal level last year, many companies went public on the Toronto Stock Exchange. There is a lot of money coming in, not just to Massachusetts, but to the United States, but certainly into Massachusetts. And we are being very careful to make sure that nobody is using corporate shells or holding companies to disguise the fact that they own more than 3%. We're not aware of anybody that's done that, but we're very careful to prevent that. And that is painstaking. I mean, you've got to literally, some of the applications for changes of control that we're reviewing have 5 or 6 holding companies stacked up on top of one another, and it's really hard to go through all that to make sure that our caps have not been violated. So no apologies for being careful and diligent about that, but it is time consuming. 2 months ago at our public commission meeting, we agreed to hire a firm to essentially augment our staff.
Is that Citron?
That is Citron Cooperman. We are currently negotiating a contract with them. I don't know that we're going to have that contract ready to go for our meeting coming up November 7th. I hope it does, but certainly by December. And that really is meant to be augmentation, not, we think we have the skills in-house already to do this, but this is meant to augment our staff, and it's to address the exact issue you just raised, which is to try to make us more efficient. But there are no apologies. I will not offer an apology for being really careful about this.
Nor should you. I mean, it's a highly regulated industry.
And this is, but the intent of the law, there's many intents, but one of the most explicit intents of the law as passed by the legislature and signed by the governor was to make this a diverse industry, and diverse not just in terms of gender and ethnicity, but diverse in terms of small and bigger companies. And so we are absolutely committed to do everything we can to make sure that that diversity does happen as the industry evolves, and this is an important part of it.
Could you see, as part of your process, different silos where if somebody's just adding a director, that's a faster process, or just adding an individual investor?
Yeah, no, we're working on it. So I believe, as I said, when we're dealing with applications, once we have deemed it complete, we're fine. We're doing it within the 90-day, and frankly, typically less than 90 days, although we're dependent on the cities and towns. Where we are having, I think, where we're a little bit behind the 8 ball is once an application, whether it's a new application or a change of control, is submitted, how long it takes us to get our staff involved in doing the intake review to make sure it's complete. And my background is in business and it's in management consulting. This is a process redesign problem. It's not just throwing more bodies at it, although we need more staff and we're hiring as we speak, but it's a process redesign, and we're going through that right now. We're committed to cut that time between a completed application and the intake review at least in half, and do that by the end of the year. And part of the process redesign will include considering the kinds of things that you just talked about.
Oh, that would be great.
But we're going to nail this. I will tell you that it's a little bit overwhelming with the number of applications I talked about, the number of changes of control, renewals. We have a 1-year renewal requirement starting when provisional licenses were issued. So the first provisional licenses were issued in June of 2018. So adding to our queue of new licenses and changes of control are all the renewals that are coming up. And it's a lot of work. We need to get better at it. But again, I am loath to just hire more people without at the same time thinking through what we've learned and how we can redesign the process. And we're doing that right now. And we have a commitment, as I said, to cut the time in half.
Oh, that's great to hear. Steve, you mentioned the rule of 3.
Yes.
And for our audience who's not familiar with that, in Massachusetts, basically you're allowed to own 3 medical, 3 recreational, 100,000 square feet under canopy, and if you can't go over more than 10% in other operations. Right. And there's the new regs have the standards about direct and indirect control. Yeah. So when we spoke last year, there clearly was a lot of press about this going on, and again, you were getting the heat for it. And being in this industry and seeing the transactions from my side, mm-hmm. I know that there has been movement by a number of these companies to get compliant, even though they're suggesting they were never non-compliant.
Sure.
What have you seen, and what have you been doing in that regard? Because there's clearly activity going on, yeah. And I assume the CCC is involved.
Yeah, I mean, I think mostly what we want to do is just be as explicit as possible in terms of our regulations. I'm not a lawyer, but I know that the issue of corporate control is not well defined legally. Just Google it, and you'll see a ton of different definitions.
I get most of my law advice by Googling.
So what we tried to do in our most recent round of regulations, as you mentioned, is try to be as explicit as possible in defining control, at least within the context of the cannabis industry. And so you mentioned 10%. 10% ownership is, in our definition, de facto evidence of control, but we also wanted to make it clear that there are other ways that you could still have control of another entity in terms of the ability to appoint directors, the ability to control specific strategic decisions and so forth. So we just tried to bring some clarity to...
And being a CEO and an officer.
Exactly. So I think we have advanced the ball a little bit in terms of bringing clarity to our definition of control. The other thing that we do is we talk to people. I mean, one of the things that I think the commission committed to from day one, and I think we've done very well on, is talking to people. We don't view our role as adversarial to industry. We view our role as working with everybody, including the industry, to make sure that our regulations are complied with. And so I'd much rather have a conversation with a person who's thinking about a particular structure than have to deal with it after the fact. And so I think we're engaged with the industry on this, and I think that's why you're hearing and seeing some progress on this. But it's a complicated issue, and I have not seen evidence of anybody trying to violate the cap limits, but I've certainly heard about people that are intending to do so, including one company that admitted so publicly when they were filing for going public in Canada. But we're, as I said, totally committed to enforce our regulations on this as well as all other fronts.
This was before you took office, but what was the thinking behind the 10%? Because it's not control. And
yeah, no, I
Google that and the legal.
If you Google control, which I have, it's more like 25%. But again, at least my opinion, and please feel free to contradict me because I am not an attorney. It's just not well defined legally. So I can't tell you where the 10% came from, other than it seemed like that was a reasonable threshold. I think it's arbitrary.
It is arbitrary.
There's no question that it's arbitrary. The issue, as we want to ensure that there's room for smaller players in this industry. I am a private sector guy for my entire career. I'm a capitalist. I went to the University of Chicago for business school. You've got to be a capitalist if you went there. I have nothing against large companies, but I do feel that it is our job to enforce the legislative intent of making sure there's room for small players. And so, most of the decisions we make, since there is not a roadmap, there's not an instruction manual, we're doing our best to exercise our best judgment, and I think this is no different. I can't defend a number. There's no algorithm to get there. But again, our intent is to enforce the law and make the industry look like the voters and the legislature intended it to look like.
Yeah, no, look, that's the number in the regs. That's the number people have to live with, and that's unless those regs get revised. But 10% from a legal standpoint, and there's economic rights and there's actual control, and 10% doesn't necessarily do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, and with respect to revising the regs, I think one of the things that we have made clear and acted upon is, we had a relatively short time frame. We were appointed September 1st of 2017. The regs had to be finalized by March 15th, 2018. That's not a lot of time. And we did draft regs, we did public hearings, we modified our regs, but we also said, we're not done. I was very proud of the job we did in putting our first regs together in March of 2018, but we knew we were going to have to make changes. One is that we were taking over the medical program from the Department of Public Health, so we knew we had to bring that in and kind of align regulations between medical and adult use. But two is, this is a new industry, and we were going to learn, and some things we weren't going to get right. We were going to see some things. So we committed to continually modify our regulations based upon those learnings and based upon some things that we might have done differently, and we just went through a round. They were promulgated, the new regulations were promulgated yesterday with the Secretary of State, so we're done with that. And we're going to do another round sometime in early 2020. We're trying to find the balance between making sure that, this is a living document, we're getting it right, we're learning, we're adapting as necessary, but I don't think it's appropriate to send the message to the industry that, every 2 weeks we're going to change the regulations. So we're trying to find that balance, but I don't view the regs as final. I view it as we're going to continue to learn and evolve and make this industry work the way it's supposed to work, including continuing to look at issues like control.
Mm-hmm. So last year we had talked about host community agreements. And recognizing that the CCC does not have the enforcement right over these towns. And while we saw some of the towns taking liberties back then, it's gotten more extreme in our experience and what our clients are running into. We're seeing requirements for significant charitable donations as part of the HCA. We're seeing towns go over the 3%, and the 3% that they can charge is supposed to be related to their actual costs. We're also seeing durations beyond the 5 years. What are your thoughts on this, and should there be a move perhaps to give enforcement powers legislatively to the CCC?
Sure. Well, first of all, I completely agree with your assessment of the fact that there are games being played, and I want to be careful. There's 351 cities and towns in Massachusetts. I am not accusing all of them of playing these games, but there's no question there are games being played. And there is no question in our mind that we do not have enforcement authority over host community agreements. So there's, I think, several things that are necessary. One is we have asked the legislature, and we're careful, you know, our job is to enforce the law, not make the law, not advocate. But where we need help from the legislature to do our job, we ask for it. So we have asked for explicitly the authority to enforce host community agreements, and that legislation is advancing. I have no clue how that process works, and we'll see, you know, if and when it happens. But we have actually there's been 7 pieces of legislation filed in the House and the Senate around host community agreements and about our authority. But there's several other issues as well as our authority. The law is very clear about the core of a host community agreement is the mitigation fee. Towns and cities can charge up to 3% for up to 5 years to offset legitimate explicit costs that are incurred by the city or town because they're hosting a marijuana facility. I haven't seen any evidence in any city or town that they're actually trying to document those costs. They're just saying it's 3%. But I think that's very explicit. The 3% in the 5 years is very explicit in the law. What is not clear in the law is, can you, in these host community agreements, ask for something else, like a fire truck, or like a park, or like a donation? And we've asked the legislature to clarify whether that's allowable or not, because right now, if you read the law, it's ambiguous.
And you've come out, the CCC has published a guideline on it.
Exactly, and so we've said, we want you to not only give us the authority to enforce these agreements, but to also clarify whether these other things are allowed or not allowed. And so that's, you know, these 7 pieces of legislation, that's included. The third thing, the unfortunate situation in Fall River has exacerbated another issue, which is we have not historically, and we don't think we have the right to do so, told cities and towns how to go through the process of issuing host community agreements, who gets to negotiate on behalf of the city or town, who gets to approve on behalf of the city or town. And in light of the Fall River indictments, there's now a concern, well, maybe cities and towns shouldn't allow one person, i.e. the mayor, to make these decisions. Maybe it should be the selectmen or some broader authority. Again, there's legislation that the 3 reps that cover the Fall River District have introduced legislation to make it make a requirement on cities and towns that they have more than one person involved in the negotiation of these agreements. So I think there's no question there's an issue. You know, we did our own analysis of the host community agreements and came to the same conclusions that you just articulated. We need legislative help to fix them and to give us the authority to fix them, and it's advancing. And I'm really hopeful that we'll get that legislation before the end of the year.
It's encouraging because you want a level playing field.
Absolutely.
And it's clearly not level depending on which town you're going to.
It's really amazing. There's 351 cities and towns, as I said, in the state. 45 or so have banned. But of the other 260, 270, it's like there are 270 different experiments going on right now. And every town is unique, and every town is trying, you know, I actually do believe that every city and town is trying to do it right. They're trying to make it work for their city and town. There's not a lot of, you know, guidance or precedent, so, you know, they're struggling a little bit. But I do think everybody's trying to get it right, but it really is totally different city to city across the state.
Well, recently Maynard kind of broke the pack with not requiring a property to be under
Yeah,
agreement.
which I think is actually, I think that's really important because, again, given how long it takes to go through the municipal process and the state process, particularly for smaller players, if you have to sign a lease and start paying rent at the beginning of that process, it can be extraordinarily expensive. So I actually really am grateful for and Maynard's not the only town that's considering that, but I'm really grateful for those cities and towns that are.
Well, that's interesting to hear because what it's also created is, the opportunity for landlords to charge extravagant rents and just to charge. We have seen fees being charged just to entertain a meeting or a letter.
Yeah, I haven't heard that, but that's disturbing.
Yeah, it is. It's highly disturbing. So it's good to hear that you are very focused on this HCA situation.
Yeah, no, it's been, as you said, we were here a year ago and we were having the same conversation. So this is an important issue. As I said, I'm very careful about not asking for legislative help or for them to change the law. I am very focused, though, when we need their help to enforce the law, and I'm really grateful for the bills that have been filed, and I'm really hopeful, as I said, that they'll become law before too long.
So one of the goals and mission statements, clearly, of the cannabis laws was, as you said, not to have it concentrated in one demographic.
Right.
So you have these social equity, economic empowerment regs, and it's a very hot topic going on. We talked about it earlier this morning with one panel, and it seems that certain towns are taking.
Are you wearing marijuana socks?
Yes, I am. And a marijuana tie.
I don't have the ability to do that.
I had a dozen pack I was going to give you afterwards.
I admire your style, but I don't think I could pull that off.
Unfortunately, this company isn't doing too well, but that's another story. As I was saying, this is a very hot topic. Your new regs provide for exclusivity on social consumption,
and
clubs on delivery. And we're seeing what's happening in Cambridge, changing the playing field on the operators who are open with the dispensaries. Do you feel that this is working at all? How does it get changed? How do we fix this so that we can accomplish that goal from a social perspective, but yet not penalize operators as well?
It's really complicated, and I'm not going to comment on what's going on in Cambridge.
No, I don't.
That's a local issue. I do appreciate the fact that cities and towns like Cambridge, Somerville, Boston, Holyoke are trying to address this. Because what I've said before is, first of all, to answer your question directly, I think we have a gigantic incomplete on this one. We have a lot of work to do. We are nowhere close to where we need to be. So I think incomplete is the best grade. That being said, when I've talked about this before, I've said for us to achieve our objectives and meet our goals here, it's got to be the commission, the legislature, cities and towns, private industry. All have to be part of the solution. So I welcome Cambridge, Somerville, Boston, Holyoke, trying to be part of the solution without commenting on whether they're taking an approach I agree with or not, because that's not my role. I welcome their involvement in this. But as I said, we are nowhere near where we need to be. I think we continue to try to take steps to help in this direction. So as you mentioned, for social consumption and delivery for 2 years, the only licensed applicants have to be either economic empowerment or social equity.
And what was the rationale behind doing that?
Well, the rationale was directly to try to meet the objectives of the legislation, which is to encourage participation by those that have been harmed by marijuana prohibition. Delivery specifically, part of delivery is that consumers want it. But in my opinion, bigger and more important part of delivery is it is by far the lowest capital requirement for any category of licenses compared to opening a retail store or a cultivation facility or whatever. Opening a delivery business has far less capital required. And again, we're trying to help people that don't have a lot of capital. So that was the explicit objective in terms of giving exclusivity to economic empowerment and social equity candidates for those categories of licenses. We also, we didn't have to do this through regulation, we just did this through an operating decision. We are now done. The legislation required us to give priority to existing medical dispensaries as well as economic empowerment candidates. We're done with that queue. There are no more people. I mean, they'll come, but right now we finished that queue. So now we're just doing general applicants, and we just decided that we were going to expedite in that general applicant pool women, minorities, veterans. So we're taking steps to try to help make this a diverse industry. I continue to say, however, that the biggest impediment, and one that we have not solved yet, is capital availability. So we gave out 128 prioritizations for economic empowerment candidates back in April of 2018. Of those, 13 are somewhere in the application process. We've given out 2 licenses, but only 13 of that 138 applied. And we went back to the other 125 and said, why have you not applied? And we got 3 reasons. One is they said they were waiting for us to approve particular licenses they wanted to go after, social consumption and delivery. So we've just addressed that. The second is we're having a real hard time getting through the municipal processes. And we've talked about that and how we need to help on that. But by far, the single largest impediment that was cited is we don't have any money. And you think about the people we're trying to help, particularly those that come from disproportionately impacted communities that were harmed by Prohibition. For the most part, the people that we're trying to help there, a lot of them have criminal records. A lot of them have almost no net worth, and therefore, even if there was lending going on in this industry, no collateral to offer against that. We need some combination of the state, the cities and towns, and the private industry to collaboratively address this issue and provide a source of capital to the people we're trying to help. And I have a multifaceted job. I worry about a lot of things pretty much every day. This is by far the biggest challenge that we have and the thing that I'm spending most of my time on. And I can't tell you I've cracked it yet, but I am not going to rest until it's cracked, because I don't think we're going to get to, I know we're not going to get to where we need to on this topic if we don't help provide a source of capital, even if the banking laws changed. And banks were more willing to come into this business and more willing to do things beyond just cash management services, which is all they're doing now. The kind of people we're trying to help will not get loans from banks. They won't qualify. So we need to do this at the state, local, and industry level.
So, I mean, one of the obvious points of resistance from the private sector is they're giving up control, and that there has to be majority ownership by these candidates in these operations. Yes. And one area to think about is you could still have meaningful ownership by these candidates, but not have to give up control. And that may be a way, if there was some movement on that front, that you would see more capital coming. I'm speaking from direct conversations with our clients.
I appreciate that. Yeah, no, it's interesting. I'm not gonna offer opinion other than I think it's absolutely something that we're thinking about. But the control issues do, I think, limit the source of private or the flow of private capital. Yeah, obviously, there's no question.
Plus, you don't want people gaming the system.
That's exactly right. But I believe that there will be and needs to be more private capital flowing in here. But I'm totally convinced, and I can't prove it, but I'm certain of this, that we have to supplement whatever private capital flows in this industry with a public source of capital. And I cite numerous examples. My most recent example, and this has happened since you and I talked last year. So Illinois just became the 11th state to legalize adult use marijuana. Illinois was the first state to do it through the legislature, not through a voter initiative. And if you look at the Illinois legislation, which the governor of Illinois signed this past summer, it looks like the Massachusetts law. I mean, we should be flattered that it literally looks like our law, including having an explicit requirement to help those that were harmed by Prohibition. The only difference in the law that Illinois passed is that they had the same tax structure we do, a local tax, state sales tax, and an excise tax. Part of the excise tax in Illinois is deferred into a fund to help these kind of candidates. That's what is required. And I will tell you that there's legislation that has been filed to do that in Massachusetts. I will tell you that we're getting some support from the legislature and from the executive on this, but we're not there yet. But to me, that is the single biggest challenge that we have left. We have tons of challenges, and we're not complacent by any stretch of the imagination. This is the biggest challenge, in my opinion, that we have left.
Well, in other industries, you actually do find that you have venture capital funds that are set up to, even in a not-for-profit structure,
Sure.
to foster development. And maybe that's one example of a solution, that there will be some VCs who say, I want to get behind this.
Yeah, no, I think so. I mean, clearly things will change as if and when the federal laws change. But, as I said, I think this has got to be a multifaceted solution. There's not one magic button to push here. I think it's got to be private sector, state, legislature, cities and towns. And as I said, the good news here, the bad news is that we haven't cracked this code yet. The good news is that a lot of people from those different parts of the universe, they're working on this. So we're going to get there. I have another 2 years, 10 months, and 8 days left in my term. Not that I'm counting.
So you do wake up every morning and look in the mirror.
We're going to get this. We're going to get this done. I'm totally committed and totally convinced we're going to get this done.
So I just briefly want to address this because you've talked about this a lot in the press, and I wanted the opportunity for a few questions.
Sure.
But Ken, for this audience's benefit, talk about the vaping situation. And I know, because we've talked about this, that your office really was not consulted.
Yeah.
And love to get your thoughts on this.
Sure. So let me start by saying I have complete respect for the governor, and I completely respect the decision he made. And we support that in terms of the way we've dealt with our licensees. So when the vaping ban was announced, we notified all of our licensees, our retail licensees, that this ban was in place. We also populated in our seed-to-sale tracking system 2 things. One is a message. So in seed-to-sale tracking, it goes all the way to retail, and if there was a retail transaction that was being consummated that was banned, we had a pop-up message saying, don't do this. We also are using our seed-to-sale tracking system to comply or to track compliance with the governor's order. So far, we have seen no non-compliance, but we're supporting it. Even though we were not consulted and not part of the decision-making process, I completely respect the governor's prerogative to make this decision, and we're supporting his decision. That being said, I have 2 big concerns. And I met with the governor recently, and I raised these. One is there is no evidence that this problem has come from licensed retailers. And the problem with a complete ban is it is driving people back to the black market, which is where this problem comes from, in my opinion. And so I think it's counterproductive. My bigger concern is that, one of the things I say often is that this is an incredibly contentious debate around legalized marijuana with no facts. And so I hear anecdotally that there are a large number of patients that rely on vaping to get their medicine. I can't prove that that's the only way they can get their medicine or that's the best way, but I hear that oftentimes, and I'm concerned that they now either can't get their medicine or they too are going to the black market to get their medicine. So one of the things that we did is, we sent a notice to each of our registered patients, over 60,000, and to the 300 clinicians that are registered in our program, and said, talk to one another and try to figure out a way around this. But I'm very concerned about this. I think that we have to see over the next, the ban is 4 months. Hopefully, we're going to get some more information. Hopefully, it's going to be clearer what the cause of this is, and we can take whatever action we need to on a much more focused and narrow basis than the complete ban. But I think we have to wait and see what comes. But again, I'm concerned about some of the impact of the ban, but it's the governor's prerogative. We support it, and we're helping implement it where we can.
But he has really transferred this issue over to DPH.
Yeah. So actually,
so that's probably where the CCC, us as an industry, need to be having this discussion.
Yeah, I learned this. I mean, we've obviously studied this carefully. So what the governor did is he did not give himself any authority. What he did is he declared a medical emergency or a public health emergency.
We call that plausible deniability.
So he declared a public health emergency and then deputized the Department of Public Health to actually execute the program to respond to that emergency. So it is in DPH's hands, absolutely.
Well, hopefully we'll see some movement on that regard.
Like everything else, this entire industry will be a lot easier as we get more information, as we get more science, as we get more facts on the table. I think we can have far more rational and informed discussions about some of the issues than right now, where you have passion and energy, but no facts. I mean, the classic is every day I have kind of back-to-back conversations with people, and the first conversation is marijuana is a pathway drug onto opioids. And then 5 seconds later, I'm talking to somebody else and they say, marijuana is a pathway drug off of opioids. There's no science.
We believe in the latter, by the way.
I'm not taking a side in this, I'm just saying we need science.
Yes. Well, great. Well, I appreciate that. You've been great with your time. I know we were running late because of the weather, but I just wanted to open up to one or two questions to the audience. And it's a little hard with these bright lights.
Someone back
Do we have a
there.
microphone, Nicole? Great.
Hi, Evan Hackle. You started out and mentioned you voted no.
I did.
And
I'm sorry, I apologize. I forgot to bring my sunglasses into this meeting.
I'm just curious, with what you now know,
Yep.
has your opinion changed?
Yep.
And why?
Sure. So it was interesting, the way this worked. I don't know how many of you know Treasurer Goldberg, but she's a piece of work, and she's my appointing authority, and I talked to her, and I didn't hear from her for a couple of weeks, and she had to legally make an appointment by September 1st of 2017. And I heard from her the Friday before September 1st, right? It was Labor Day weekend. And she called at 5 o'clock and said, she didn't ask me what I want to do. She said, on Tuesday, a press release is going out announcing your appointment. And on Wednesday, you're having a press conference, period. So I spent the weekend reading the law and preparing for the press conference. And I knew I was going to get asked the question because it was public knowledge that I voted against question 4. How it became public knowledge, I still don't know. But it was public knowledge. So I'll just repeat what I said in the press conference because it's true. I support the objectives of the law. I believe that prohibition does not work. Didn't work for alcohol. It doesn't work for marijuana. I believe that communities that were disproportionately harmed by prohibition deserve to benefit from legalization. So I support all the objectives of the law. The reason I voted against it is I said, my God, what a complicated issue and what an incredibly short time frame to implement. And I find it at least somewhat ironic that I'm in the job I am right now trying to implement this law in what I consider to be an incredibly short time frame. So again, I support the objectives, always have. I'm proud of what we've done, but we have a lot of work to do. And I do think, I think back, we got appointed September 1st. There were 5 commissioners. We're independent, which means we're not part of any other agency, which means we had no office, we had no staff, we had no money, and we had all these incredibly quick legislative mandates in terms of getting our regulations done, accepting applications, approving applications. I really do think it was incredibly quick. And I haven't changed my opinion on that, but again, I completely support the objectives of the law, always have.
Thank you. Anyone? Yes?
You didn't tell me the press was allowed here.
I don't know how that happened. I thought we were alone.
With the vaping issue that we've been seeing in the research that's going on now, is it possible to foresee any changes in the industry that this might bring about? For example, do you see new laboratory testing requirements?
Yeah.
Testing for new elements? What other changes?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great point, and I should have mentioned that when I responded to Frank's original question about vaping. So one of the things that we immediately did when this vaping ban was announced was talk to our laboratories. And we did 2 things. One is we asked the labs. There's this one of the speculations was around vitamin E acetate, and we went to our labs and said, "Can you test for this if it turns out that the science shows that that's the problem?" So we're working with our labs on a continuous basis to make sure that whatever we learn about the cause of this, we can test for. The second thing we did is we imposed a requirement on all of our licensees with respect to labeling that they labeled all of the additives that were put into their product. Again, we don't know which of those additives, if any, are the cause of the problem, but we wanted to ensure that consumers were informed. So I think you're absolutely right. I think that once we get the science around what the problem is here, or what the cause of the problem is here, I think we're in a position with our laboratories and our labeling requirements to actually respond quickly to those. So thank you for that question.
Just one more. All right, see any hands?
There was one in the back, way in the back there, Frank.
Okay.
Hi. Is there any effort to change the messaging with regard to the vape ban in terms of the CCC allowing the licensed holders to start selling prior to the January 2020 ban being lifted? Is there anything that the CCC could do with regard to, I mean, it really is forcing people into the black market. And with regard to kind of the partnership that you've established with the license holders, is this really the best way of doing that in terms of now it's much more confrontational and oppositional in terms of not doing anything to protect them?
Yeah, no, we have absolutely no ability to do what you suggested, unfortunately. We have to follow the governor's orders and the Department of Public Health requirements, which is there is a complete ban in the state of Massachusetts on the sale of vaping products. We have absolutely no discretion whatsoever on that. As I said, what we've tried to do is help our licensees with messaging in terms of making sure they're aware of the ban and tracking their compliance, but we have absolutely no discretion about allowing our licensees to, in any way, shape, or form, violate the ban.
No, the only thing we can do is continue to work collaboratively, the industry with the CCC, to try to bring some rationale to this decision, and particularly with the DPH. And those efforts are going on. I will say that the CCC is very open to working with the industry. They are an ally in this. They're an ally in the entire industry. I don't want to suggest otherwise. A number of us have had discussions with the CCC and with Steve, and we are working through that process, and we'll be engaging the DPH and the governor's office as well. Well, again, I want to thank you for your time.
It's always fun.
You're very gracious. I wish we had more time, but thank you. We appreciate all the work the CC's doing, you're at the helm of it. We know it's not an easy job. There's always criticism, but there needs to be praise as well.
Thank you.
So thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Great.
Thank you.